I'm going to launch my project without the debugger just to get it running in the browser. We can have a quick look at where we left off with it. I'll also open up my SQL server. So here's my local copy. And last week we added some content. We added the link to our Git repository. We created a README file. So I think we talked about it. I don't think I walked through the whole process. I know not everybody will have access to do it. It depends on your credits, but I want to go through the process of how I would get all of this stuff up on Azure. I'll go through that process and record it. If you don't have any Azure credits, I'll maybe talk to you on the break. There are a few other options for deploying this, but I'll go through the process. So first thing I'm going to have to do is log into the Azure portal. I'm going to have to create an empty database here. So I'm going to create my database and then I'll rerun my script. So right in the top here, I can create a database, or I could go over here. There's a few, I could go to SQL databases, or I could just click create a resource here. Any one of these will work. So it gives me the option to create a new database. Now you don't need to put your Control-Alt-PC site up on Azure, but if you have access to do it for assignment 1, that would be ideal. So if you want to go through and walk through the process with me now, you can. And then if you can delete you can stop the service or delete it so it doesn't eat up your credits. I'm just going to do it for now. And then I'll stop it. So we get this screen. It asks for a resource group. So I'll create one just for our in-class project. So you could just call it assignment 1. So we already have one of those. If you already have a resource group, it's just a way of grouping your things together. We have to give our database a name. And then we have to actually create a server. So I just click this create new button. It wants me to name the server, and it will have a database.windows.net suffix automatically. And then I have to create a username and password to connect to my database. And I'll want to allow Azure services to access the server. So I'll just check that. Now at this point, it's always a good idea to take this login information and put it in a file somewhere that's secure, because if I lose these credentials, I'll have to reset them in my application, my ASP.NET application. I won't be able to connect to the database. So I'll just go ahead and I'll put it in the server. So I'll just save those credentials. Because in order to connect to my database through Visual Studio and Management Studio, I need those 4 credentials. Host, the database name, username and password. Yes. Yeah. So the database name is over here in the main window, and then the server name, username, and password is in this little pop-up when I create the server. And yeah, we do want to make sure, because if we don't do this, when our web application tries to talk to it, the SQL server says, no, nothing can get in here. So we want to make sure we check that off. So I'll click OK. And then my new server automatically shows up here. The other thing I'm going to do, you probably don't need to. This is the plan, and I know a few people, I know, Linda, you had this where it gave you an estimated cost of $500 a month. So yeah, I don't need 2 cores and 32 gigs of storage. So I'm going to click this configure database and choose something cheaper. It's defaulting to a much more expensive option that would eat up my credits. So this is this is probably the screen that you got last week. I know a couple other people said they had the same. So this is under, notice it's selecting their general purpose option, looking for basic. Yes, I am, I want basic. So if I click this, this is, it's estimating if I let this run, it's going to cost me $7 a month. I'm just going to create it, and at the end of class, I'm going to stop it. Well, if I stop the service, it's not going to use up. It doesn't use up, it doesn't cost me anything if the service isn't running. So I'll just run it for right now, and then I'll stop it. So I'll apply that. I'll take their cheapest plan. And then I can just go ahead and create it. So this will take a minute or so to create. Now on Azure, there's one more step I'll need to take before I can actually access my database through Visual Studio or Management Studio. By default on Azure, when we create an SQL Server database, their firewall is set to block all remote connections, meaning I can't connect to it from my PC. So what I'm going to need to do is change the firewall on the database so that I can access it from school, from home, if I'm out at a coffee shop, from wherever. I want to allow remote IPs in, so long as I provide the username and password, I should be allowed into my own database. So once this deployment is done, which shouldn't take us too long, I can actually set it up and try to connect to it now. But it's going to tell me that remote access is disabled, even when I put in all the proper credentials. So I'm going to go into my Management Studio, and I'll try and set up a connection here to my database that will store my username and password. So when I come back, I can just click and open it. I don't have to log in it every time. So in Management Studio, I have this little window at the top left that's called Registered Servers. For some people, that window is visible, and some it isn't. If it's not visible, you just turn it on through the View menu. It's the third option here under View and Registered Servers. This basically shows all of the database servers that we've saved where we have a login. So under Registered Servers, there's a little folder here called Local Server Groups. This is here by default. You don't have to create it. So if I right-click it and choose New Server Registration, it's going to ask me to put in the credentials to a server I want to connect to. So I'll choose New Server Registration. And I'll put in the credentials I just set up. So there's my host or my server. Always going to end with database.windows.net. I have to use SQL Server authentication, so I'll put in my username and password. And I want to make sure I check remember password. This way it doesn't prompt me for the password every time I try to connect. It's just saved. And I'll give this a friendly name down here. So this is my Control-Alt-PC Azure. So when I click test, this is what I get. Can't open the server because my IP address is not allowed. To enable access, use the Windows Azure Management Portal to create a firewall rule for this IP address or a range of IPs. So I need to go back to the Azure portal. This is just a couple of clicks in order to make this error go away. So once my database is set up, I can just go to my resource. So here's my database. It's empty. And there's a button right here in the middle that says Set Server Firewall. So I'm going to choose that option. Now it shows me my current IP, and there's a quick button if I want to just add my current IP, meaning whenever ever at the college I can connect. I can do this, but doing this isn't probably good enough because it means I can only connect when I'm at the college. If I leave the college, it'll still block me. So the easiest way is I want to set up a rule in this section here that will allow me to connect from anywhere. So long as I have an internet connection and I have the username and password, I can get in. So I can just give this a name. Just put in text, I'll call it all. So start IP 0.0.0.0 and my end IP. So basically the entire range of IPv4s. No matter where I am, let me in. And then I just click save. So this will allow me in regardless of where I am. So this just takes a minute. To test this out, I can go back here and click on test again. So there's my fix. That remote connections error goes away with this rule, allowing any IP in. So I'll just save that connection now. And if I want to connect to my database now on Azure, I can just double click it. And it connects, and here's my database in Object Explorer. Now it's a brand new one, so I don't have any tables in it, it's empty. So if this was my assignment, I could just go into the visual table editor like we did in class last week, create a table, start adding the columns and the primary keys, and click save. Or in this case, I can open up my Control-Alt-PC script from last week, and I can run it. So if I just open my file, so now I've got a copy of my database, although it's empty, there's no data in it, but I now have my 5 tables living in my Azure database. So the database part is finished now. I've done everything I needed to do. I set it up, I saved my credentials in a file, so I have them. I've opened up the firewall, and I've set up a connection in Management Studio. So my connection is saved here. If I close Management Studio, I'm done working for today. If I want to come back and work on this later, and I need to access my database again, it actually just defaults to the database I was connected to last time. So here's my Azure database. I just click connect, and I'm back in. So there's a few steps I have to go through to set it up, but once it's set up and saved, I can just open Management Studio and connect to it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go into my web project. So right now, here's my default connection in Pascal case. Right now, it's connected to my local host. If I try to put my website up on Azure, obviously this isn't going to work. The Azure web server can't find a database on my laptop. So in order to deploy this to the web server, I need to change this connection. So what I will do is put in my server as so now I want to actually deploy my website to Azure as well. Got the database set up, it's empty. So what I'm going to do is use Azure's continuous deployment. I don't need FTP when I'm working with a cloud service like Azure. So here's how we set up the web application part. I'm going to go to create a new resource. And I'm going to pick web app. So I can use my existing resource group. I can group my database and my website together, and I can give it a name. So it will run under a subdomain of .azurewebsites.net. For my runtime stack, I want to make sure I pick .NET Core 2.2, and that will automatically toggle the operating system from Linux to Windows. I'm going to change my size here again to get something as small as possible because they're charging me. Oh, this is the smallest. Oh, this one's free. Okay, 60 minutes a day. So I'll create the project. While I'm doing this, I want to make sure that I upload the latest version of my project to GitHub because I've now put in my database connection string that points to my Azure database. But this code's on my computer, it's not on GitHub. I'm going to go to my Team Explorer and make a new commit, Azure DB. So I'll push those changes to GitHub. And once this is done, we'll go into the deployment center and we'll connect our website to our GitHub repository. So the way Azure's continuous deployment works is every time we make a new commit to the master branch, Azure will automatically pull the new version. It will archive the old version and it will publish the new version. So I'll go into my resource here. And I'll go into the deployment center. So I have a website right now, it's just blank. It should load. It shouldn't take too long, we'll take a break very shortly. So my website's loading, it just gives us, it throws a template HTML page in here when you first set this up. So if I go to the deployment center, it says, where do you want to deploy from? So I'm going to choose GitHub. Now notice it already has my GitHub username here. If you're doing this for the first time, it won't know who you are on GitHub. So if you choose GitHub, it will pop open a window asking you for your GitHub username and password. I've already done this. So actually, if I log out of GitHub, I'll show you what it will look like when we have to log in. I guess it didn't. I typically pick this option, the app service build. Just click on this. So that's in the build provider. I click here. And then once I pick my GitHub login, I have two because I have an individual and a group account. You will probably just have one, so it'll just default. And now it lists all of my repositories in alphabetical order. So here's my Control-Alt-PC site. And then it asks, which branch do I want to deploy? Well, I only have one branch, which is the master branch. So I'll pick that. And I click finish. So now it's connecting to GitHub, and it's trying to sync and pull a copy of the code from GitHub over to the Azure server. Now, this system works well for a few reasons. One is it's a really good incentive to make sure we're backing things up to GitHub all the time. Two, we don't have to do a separate upload of our files. We don't have to use FileZilla. We don't have to use FTP. So it finds my latest commit message. The other nice thing is if our website is running today and then we make a change later and we push that to GitHub and we push it to Azure and suddenly something breaks, Azure keeps a log of all the earlier commits. So we can easily just click on an earlier version and it will disable the current version and reactivate an older version. Well, we can go, and that gives us time to then go ahead and fix the problem, and our website, we can bring it back online instantly. When we upload files with FTP, we've overwritten the old ones. They're gone. So if we broke something, we're going to have to figure out what we did and undo and redo code. So now it says my deployment is active. If ever this shows an error, the error is in here. There's a little log file, and under show log, if for some reason it doesn't properly pull our code from GitHub, the log will tell us why. The error message will be in here. So now if I refresh, my website should be live. But my database will be empty. In my local database in class last week, I created a few categories. If I go to my categories page right now, it's going to be empty because there's nothing in my Azure database. So if I want to look in here now, if I look in my category table, I should see two categories, the two that I just added. So now my project is connected up to my Azure database, and we can see the data that I'm adding through my browser. I'm going to make one quick change to my homepage, just so we can see how the continuous deployment works. If I just go to my index view, if I change something in my project, I just put on line 12. And I'll go back and just commit this change to GitHub. So it'll push that change to GitHub. But notice I haven't clicked anything. Azure automatically recognizes that I just made a change to my master branch. And it's trying to deploy this one. I believe it checks every 60 seconds when it's connected to a repository. Azure goes and checks that repository every 60 seconds to see if there's a new commit.
Do you know if Azure does a incremental transfer of files over?
It's a good question.
From the commit?
I'm not sure whether it does or whether it doesn't. So now it says that this is now the active one. You can also do it manually if you just click sync. And you do have the option to set up an FTP login if you prefer to use FTP, but this seems much easier. So now if I refresh, it'll take a minute because the whole thing's been rebuilt. So now my new content is here. So continuous deployment is the way that most cloud services work now. They want us to be using version control and deploying from version control. Okay, let us take a pause. We'll take 10 minutes here.